Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that with NOAA Weather Radio, watching your favorite broadcast partner, or by going to the weather info line at 800-472-0391. Some of you may have seen the crawl at the bottom of your screen. That would be the emergency alert system telling you there is active or dangerous weather in your area. You can go to Facebook. We've been talking about some of the weather situations around Alaska today, including mudslides in Sitka, as well as severe thunderstorms around south central Alaska. NWS Alaska and following the hashtag AKwx is a very easy and fast way to get weather information and to share weather information with us. We thank all of you for sharing your hail pictures around south central Alaska. Now here's a look at YouTube, and you can always go to NWS Alaska and AKwx TV following this show, and you can find the complete broadcast there. Here's a look at the hazardous weather situation now across southeastern Alaska, and you'll notice there's two areas highlighted. One of those is for a high wind warning there around the Skagway and Haines area. In fact, some cruise ship traffic was diverted because of some of the strong winds moving out around Skagway earlier last night and earlier today. Now, conditions will likely improve as we go into the nighttime and early morning hours tomorrow, but wind gusts were up around 52 miles per hour around Skagway earlier. We're also watching for winds around the Juneau region. That will continue through the evening, as well as periods of heavy rain. A flood advisory is also in effect there through this evening, thanks to very heavy rain across parts of central and northern sections of southeastern Alaska, to the tune of nearly 4.6 inches or so around Yakutat, and Sitka had more than 2.6 inches of rain. Of course, and it can be spread out over a long period of time, but when it comes down in really short order, that can cause some pretty major problems. And again, mudslides have been a fairly major issue around Sitka today. Here's a look at the satellite picture. We're going to turn back the hands of time a little bit toward yesterday, and you'll notice that very deep flow coming up across southwestern Gulf and into the northern parts of the Gulf Coast. All of this was pushing right in toward Sitka, and the leading edge of that very deep and tropical air mass, along with some lift and of course running right into the mountains, would just wring out that excessive amounts of rainfall. Again, 4.6 inches in Yakutat as well. Not the only ones that saw some very heavy rain, 3.3 inches or so, or 2.3 inches around Cordova. All that moisture was working its way up across the Chugach Range and the Kenai Mountains and into the regions around Gulkana. Gulkana picked up a good 2 to 3 inches of rain, I believe, across some parts of the Glen Allen and Copper River Basin. So just a terribly wet day across the southern third of the state. Now, as we look northward, you can still see the northerly winds dropping into the Bering Sea. That is on the backside of this low pressure system now that's working right through southeastern Alaska. And as a result of that, conditions should start to improve, but there's still an opportunity for some heavier rainfall across southeastern Alaska tonight. And we've seen stronger thunderstorms forming on the backside of this low pressure system around the Matanuska Valley. A couple of those have been confirmed to be severe, at least one of them, with a quarter-inch hail around the Meadow Lakes area. Or 1-inch diameter hail, I should say, about the size of a quarter. So that's enough to put some dings in your car. That's enough to put some dents in your siding if it hits just right. Usually a little bit larger than that for any severe damage, but it certainly is noticeable. And in some cases, there's been enough hail on the ground probably about an inch deep in some parts of the Matanuska Valley. So certainly an unusually strong storm for the region, and as we get closer and closer to fall, that will be a little bit harder to pull off. But the air mass is still very wet across south and western Alaska, and you can see a lot of cloud buildup again across the interior and across the east. Quite a bit of lightning across the Yukon earlier today. Showers and gusts up across the north slope this afternoon. Some of those winds were in the 20 and 30 mile an hour range. A blustery day around Nome and Tin City, as well as many areas again in southeastern Alaska. High pressure is trying to equalize that difference, and all the air coming into the Bering is rushing into the vacuum created by low pressure across south central and southeastern Alaska. Now tonight, watch for periods of rain to continue across south and east. Some of that will be heavy at times, but probably a lot of the worst of it is probably over. Out across the Copper River Basin and north and west, rainfall a little bit more garden variety, probably still an opportunity for some storms on the west side of this low pressure system. And then showers across the middle and lower Yukon Valley. Out to the west, a better chance for fog and stratus to form. Showers still likely across the central and western Bering as we head into Wednesday, as well as the north slope and across the lower Yukon and upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys, as well as showers across the eastern Brooks Range. Warmer air still lifting northward thanks to tropical characteristics pushing that forward and running into high pressure across Bristol Bay. So this will slow on the onset of that leading edge of warmer air toward the Alaska Peninsula. Showers are likely over the higher terrain. A little bit of clearing across the northern and western Gulf. It may still be breezy across the Barren Islands and into Prince William Sound, at least for tomorrow, and then things should settle out a little bit into Thursday, with showers and rainfall a little bit more likely across the northern parts of southeast to Yakutat. We'll keep some light rain in the forecast for Thursday across southeast. Drier weather setting in for the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, and a good chunk of the Matanuska and Susitna Valley. A little bit better chance for clouds to remain over the higher terrain and the Copper River Basin and the Alaska Range. And we're still going to see some showers and thunderstorms up across the northern parts of the Alcan border and into the northern sections of Yukon, with fog along the Arctic coast. Not quite as breezy there, but low pressure sitting out across the Bering will keep the risk of showers going around the Pribilovs, as well as maybe even some light rain across St. Paul and St. George and eastern chain, as well as the Alaska Peninsula, as another wave of low pressure starts to form there and will track to the north and to the east. So we'll have to see how that plays out heading into Friday and Saturday. Pretty active pattern for right now. Temperatures today were in the lower to mid 60s for most of southern southeast, up around Haines and Skagway and Juneau. We saw readings there from the upper 50s to lower 60s. Yakutat managed to pull off 59. Mid 60s around Prince William Sound, 74 in Seward, 59 in Homer, 67 in Kenai, and 69 in Anchorage today, with lower 60s up the Susitna Valley. So this difference in heating, as well as the dynamics or the strength of that low pressure system working the air upwards, allowed that thunderstorm to form across south central. And same point, the other side of that managed to push all of that very wet air right here into Sitka and Yakutat in the northeastern Gulf. Mid-50s around the middle Tanana Valley and points east today toward Northway and Eagle. 61 at Fort Yukon, 45 for Anaktuvuk Pass, lower 30s for the Beaufort Seacoast, including Barrow. 40 around Wainwright. Looks like many areas down toward Point Hope and Point Lake cooled off into the lower 40s today. Kotzebue Sound saw temps in the lower 50s, 48 in Nome, 62 around Caltag, 61 in Galena. Lower 50s for Grayling and Sparrowbond. Lake Iliamna saw 66. King Salmon and Dillingham were in the mid-60s, just shy of 70 in Kodiak. Must have been a great day there. Mid to upper 50s around the Alaska Peninsula, 64 for Sand Point, lower 50s for St. Paul and St. George, as well as for the central and western chain. Now, overnight low temperatures will stay in the mid-40s for most of the upper Kuskokwim and lower Yukon valleys, 54 in Kodiak, low 50s for southeast, close to 50 degrees for south central. The North Slope in the lower 30s, many stations going just below freezing overnight. And the Alaska Peninsula and the chain will see temperatures cooling into the upper 40s to about 50 degrees, with St. Paul about the lower 40s there, warming to about 52 tomorrow. 54 in Nunivak Island, 50 for Nome, upper 30s for the Arctic coast, 37 in Barrow. Upper 50s and lower 60s for most of southeast, with Sitka at 62, Ketchikan and Annette both in the lower 60s tomorrow. Prince William Sound close to 60 degrees, and most of south central, including the Matanuska and Susitna valleys, also in the lower 60s with Fairbanks around 58. Flying weather includes IFR conditions for the Arctic coast tomorrow, as well as a good chunk of the Kotzebue Sound region, Norton Sound, and along the northern parts of the YK Delta. Bristol Bay will see some improvement with IFR conditions out to the west as well as the western chain, and watch for IFR across the eastern Alaska range and north of the Talkeetnas with a chance for showers and storms there. MVFR conditions will prevail for most of the interior as well as southeastern Alaska. Here's your past conditions. We expect IFR to start your day in Aktuvik with improvement as we go through Adigan Pass as well. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass are expected to see improving weather during the day. Look for VFR by the second half. Rainy Pass also expecting to see some improvement toward visual flight rule. Windy Pass, we expect to see that worsen as the day goes on. Look for IFR conditions to develop there, and showers and thunderstorms are possible, as well as in Isabel Pass, starting out at IFR conditions there for your Wednesday. Mentasta Pass, we expect instrument flight rule to start your Wednesday with showers and storms possible there, and for Toneda Pass looks to see improvement during the day. And Portage Pass will probably be VFR through a good chunk of the day. A lot of the weather will be north and east, and Chilkoot and White Pass likely holding at MVFR conditions with a decrease in the amount of wind blowing through there. Freezing levels show the surface freezing lines dropped into the northern and eastern parts of the coastal plain, and you'll see freezing levels as low as 2,000 to 4,000 feet right over the Brooks Range, and then it gets a little bit better, 6,000 to 8,000 feet across the west coast, and ranging from about 8,000 feet just south of the Chugach to Wrangell, St. Elias, and into the central and southern parts of southeast as much as 10,000 to 12,000 feet. Icing potential is still a little high up there out across the central and western Bering, above 10,000 feet, but when you get to about 6,000 to 7,000 feet, you'll see a better chance for some light to isolated moderate along the Alcan border and south and out across the Gulf. Now, any showers and thunderstorms that do form, any convective areas, of course, do imply that risk of light icing, at least to start, and then a risk of severe icing in the vicinity of any showers and storms in the region. The jet stream shows us a pretty active pattern. You can see this dip coming out of the Arctic and then a little bit of a rise here thanks to high pressure trying to slow down the winds just a hair. But we have two fairly active areas. One's across the western parts of Canada, another across the Arctic, and then you can see the reinforcing moisture pump coming up out of the north and western Pacific there. So all of this is pointing moisture right at southeastern Alaska and keeping a very active weather pattern going as Mother Nature tries to kind of get the Arctic spun up for business here going into winter. The west has a general flow right now. You can see the west coast looking at winds around 10 to 15 knots, a little bit faster going over St. Lawrence Island as winds come in from the south and west, and same goes for the north slope. Southeast looking at winds around 20 to 25 knots or so at 9,000 feet, so the really fast winds are right over the open waters of the Gulf and just on the south side of low pressure out on the Bering Sea. When you get to 3,000 feet though, you see a little bit of a different flow at this point. High pressure sitting across the eastern chain as well as the Alaska Peninsula. Northwesterlies are coming across the upper Kuskokwim as well as the middle Tanana Valley. Those winds around 15 to 20 knots or so, and you can see a little bit of a trough right here across the northern Gulf. This again swinging through could bring more rain into the region for southeast tomorrow, and the winds will pick up when that comes in. Northerlies coming in across the eastern parts of the Beaufort Seacoast, 10 to 20 knots, and then those winds also become a little more northeasterly north of the Bering, but the ridge across the eastern chain is trying to slow those winds down across the west coast, and again that'll bring some more unsettled weather your way. So what about turbulence? It looks like we could have some bumps out across Norton Sound below 4,000 feet tomorrow, light to isolated moderate there. Winds coming out over the Barrens should be slowing down, but there's still going to be some chop with that, feeding into low pressure as it works slowly away from southeast. As that fills in, look for a chop below 6,000 feet and also across the central and southern parts of southeast. This trend will be moving away from southeast throughout the day. The trend out across the Bering will be increasing, and we expect improvement slowly and surely across the Barrens and across the west coast as we go through tomorrow. So an awful lot going on with aviation, showers and thunderstorms in the region, as well as heavy rain and probably impacting visibility again for the daytime tomorrow. So just be careful and fly smart as you head out in your Wednesday around Alaska. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned. Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. As you well know, you can get forecast information for any day of the week. Today, tonight, tomorrow, out to 6 or 7 days. It includes the high and low temperature, the wind direction, the chance of rain or snow in your part of Alaska. But did you know that there is information available to forecast out to 2 weeks? So the question is, how would you use that information? And here to answer that question today and tell us a lot more about climate services from the U.S. National Weather Service Alaska region is Rick Toman. He's the program manager for the Climate Science and Services. And Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
How would we use information that is out to 2 weeks instead of just the high and low and the chance of rain?
Well, Dave, as we move out in time, of course, forecasts become more uncertain. So as we move into that second week from now, we're not looking at specific highs or lows or precipitation amounts at any given place. What we can do with the state of the science at this point is get a handle on patterns. So we can say things like increased chances for stormy weather in the Bering Sea in 2 weeks, or we've been in a cold weather pattern, looks like 8 to 10 days from now, that pattern's going to change. Those are the kind of forecasts that we can currently make in that second week.
So you're increasing lead time for perhaps big or small weather events and telling us the likelihood of maybe more coastal storms or wind events in some areas?
Those are the kinds of things that that we hope to be able to let Alaskans know in the second week forecast. And if you have an activity or an event that you would find that kind of advance notice useful, whether it's moving stuff off of the beach, whether to go out hunting or to come back from camp, those kind of decisions, the week 2 provides the opportunity for you to get a handle on that kind of information.
Okay. What other type of weather impacts that we're familiar with might Alaskans use climate services for?
Well, in the forecast realm, we can go provide some information from this week 2, say the 8 to 14 day period, on out to the monthly and even seasonal time scale. Now, those monthly seasonal forecasts are still kind of just really very much pattern dependent, and the amount of detail that we can provide at this point is still pretty limited. Generally, indications of how temperature and precipitation will fall in maybe above normal, below normal kind of range. But in the week 2 period, we can be considerably more specific than that as far as the general patterns and really the impacts on Alaskans.
Okay, so we would be talking about generalizations there that would tell us that the period might be more stormy, might be more hot, more dry, more cold, and situations like that.
That's correct. So we're not going to be able to say in which community, for instance, there's the threat of coastal flooding, but we can often be able to tell we're moving into a pattern that would be conducive to big Bering Sea storms. So if you're in an area that could potentially impact you, you'll want to pay attention to the weather forecast.
Okay. Now, every day and every hour of the day, the National Weather Service is working on a forecast for the next day. But how do you start your forecast process for that extended period that goes out beyond 7 days?
Well, the way things work right now, we start off with the expected general flow pattern for Alaska and the whole world, really, and then we narrow that down to Alaska. So we start off with the basic computer model forecast. There's quite a few different computer models that we look at, bring those together. And then another important part of that is we attempt to assess the confidence. The reality is often 2 weeks away, the computer models are very divergent. They have lots of different solutions, and that's an indication that we don't have much confidence. But when we see more agreement in that time frame, and when that agreement is a pattern that will be potentially very impactful for Alaska or is a big change from what we've been in, that's when we can then take that expected pattern. We have computer models forecasting it. We've assessed the confidence. Now we can move that forward. How, using our experience as Alaskan weather forecasters, how does that typically play out for Alaska? So is this a stormy pattern for the Bering Sea? Is this an extra rainy period for Southeast? Is this the kind of pattern that generates strong winds potentially in the Anchorage Bowl? Is this a deep cold pattern for the interior? All of those are the kind of things that we're looking at in these large-scale patterns. That's very different than telling you that the winds on 10 days from now are going to be gusting to 120 on the hillside. We're looking for patterns, not the very specific information that the Weather Service will then hone in on as the event gets closer.
So the idea is to keep the 5, 6, 7-day forecast the same, where you are getting the standard high and low temperature and the chance of wind or rain. But further out, you get a broad general forecast, but as the time gets closer to that event, we'll get a lot more specific.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. So how can people use this information if I am out in the bush and I want to see, is a coastal storm expected in my region, or is a chance for that improving over the next 2 to 3 weeks? Where could I go to get information like that?
When we see that potentially impactful or a big change in the weather is coming 8 to 14 days out, typically we will start to highlight that on the Weather Service Facebook site. We might produce a YouTube video highlighting that, linking that on our Facebook site. So often we don't, at this point, we don't have much to say in that because we're really looking for those forecasts of opportunities. But one thing we can say very likely as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more and more of this kind of forecast information available in that week 2 time frame.
Okay, and something that emergency managers and city planners and folks in villages might be interested in keeping an eye out for, looking for that information to be headlined, whether that's on social media or perhaps through the National Weather Service channels there to get information from you to make better plans a little bit longer term and make better preparations in the event that things become a little bit more unsettled.
Absolutely. Climate Services with the National Weather Service Alaska region is talking to the state of Alaska every week, apprising them of that 2-week outlook. And on the social media side, we are working to keep Alaskans informed so that when we think we have some confidence in a high impact or a big change, that's the best way right now for folks to find out about that. Twitter, Facebook, so stay tuned to your National Weather Service.
Very good, a developing program. Rick Thoman with the National Weather Service Alaska region. He's a Climate Science and Services Program Manager. Thanks so much for joining us again, Rick, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Great, thanks Dave.
For another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. We'll see you next time. If you ever need an encyclopedia with legs, that would be Rick Thoman. He's a good guy with a lot of really cool information. Now, information you need in Southeast. When will it stop raining? Probably not tonight. It'll probably rain some more. But we do have onshore winds coming in across coastal areas with westerlies going tomorrow about 15 to 20 knots, 11 to 12 foot seas expected up and down the coast. On the inside, you're looking at 15 to 20 knots, more of a southerly push for the central and northern passages there. In the Lynn Canal, you're looking at 4 foot seas. Across the Clarence Strait, 3 foot seas with a 15 knot westerly wind. And again, that's going to push more rain in through the region, though it does not look to be quite as heavy as what you're dealing with today in many locations. Now for Thursday, northwesterly set in 10 to 20 knots along the outer coast, 6 to 7 foot seas there, with the inside winds going southerly still around the Lynn Canal at 10 knots. They diminish 15 to 20 knots across the central and southern passages. A little bit of a switch here across the central region with 3 to 4 foot seas expected as you go into Thursday. For Wednesday across south central, look for light winds coming down Cook Inlet. Northerlies a little more variable south of Clam Gulch, and then once you get into the Barrens, we're still going to have that drainage wind coming in from the west to northwest, 25 to 30 knots with some stronger gusts in the region possible, 7 to 8 foot seas. Look for northwesterlies inside and outside of Prince William Sound, 2 foot seas on the inside, 7 to 8 foot seas on the outside as you head over to Resurrection Bay. Northerlies continue down Cook Inlet on Thursday, about 10 to 15 knots there, 15 knots coming across the Barrens, so winds improve, and 10 to 15 knots coming outside of Prince William Sound with 5 foot seas in the northern Gulf. That diminishes to 4 foot seas as you head to the west, and 5 foot seas just east of Kodiak Island with a westerly wind at 15 knots. More of a variable flow inside of Shelikof Strait, and looking at 2 foot seas there through your Thursday. Westerlies will be up in the Bristol Bay region tomorrow at 20 knots with a 2 foot sea. Northeasterlies coming south of Kodiak Island at 15 knots with 5 to 6 foot seas there. As you get into Thursday, look for a variable flow on the Bering Sea coast, 2 foot seas there along that region. Southerlies from Castle Cape to Chignik with a 15 knot wind with a 5 foot sea, and easterlies south of Sand Point and King Cove with 20 knots at 6 foot seas there for Thursday afternoon. For the Aleutians, a northeasterly wind will take over for the central and eastern chain. Look for 10 to 15 knots on the Bering Sea coast, 20 knots on the Pacific coast with 6 to 7 foot seas, and southwesterlies already meeting up. The return flow working into the western parts of the Bering with a 7 foot sea and 10 knot winds just to the east on that transition period. Now for Thursday, look for more of a westerly push across the Bering Sea coast, 15 to as high as 25 knots all the way out toward Adak, and north and northwesterlies across the Pacific coast, about 15 to 20 knots with 6 to 7 foot seas. Northwesterlies also take over from Kiska to Attu at 15 to 20 knots with a 6 to 7 foot sea on Thursday. For the west coast, south and westerly winds are the predominant direction here, about 15 to 25 knots with the strongest winds at around St. Matthew. A 5 to 6 foot sea in the north, 3 foot seas from the Kuskokwim Bay all the way out toward St. Paul and St. George with 3 foot seas in the Bering. As you get into Thursday, southerlies pretty much hold on to most areas, including now St. Paul and St. George, 15 knots there with a 5 foot sea, about the same there around St. Lawrence Island. We're still looking at the strongest winds around St. Matthew and light northeasterlies coming out of the Kuskokwim Delta. About 10 knots, 2 foot seas are expected there on Thursday. Now up north, look for easterlies coming across the Beaufort Seacoast, northeasterlies coming down the Chukchi Seacoast at 20 knots with a 3 to 5 foot sea. Northerlies outside of Kotzebue Sound also going at 20 knots. That diminishes greatly by Thursday, 10 to 15 knots for the Chukchi Seacoast, and light easterlies coming across the Beaufort with 3 foot seas there. And with that cooler weather that we're seeing, we're no longer seeing sea surface temperatures having a really great impact on melting, so don't look for a whole lot of improvement along that edge. And we also know that some of that ice pack could be shifting around enough, and it's still holding very close to the region around Deadhorse and Kaktovik. So continue to monitor that if you're trying to look for passage between Barrow and Kaktovik in the coming days. Tonight's weather shows periods of rain. Some of that could be heavy still across southeastern Alaska. We know of mudslides around Sitka today. We know of severe thunderstorms around the Matanuska Valley, and showers and thunderstorms may continue across south central, and there will be some periods of heavier rainfall in the next day or so around southeast and across the Alcan border and Wrangell-St. Elias region and up the areas to the west into the Copper River Basin. A lot of that will be slowing down, though, from west to east. As we go into Wednesday, look for low pressure to hover across the northern Gulf. Weather becomes a little more showery in places as we go through the day, especially across the interior. We'll watch for an opportunity for a thunderstorm or two across the eastern Alaska range, with high pressure slowing things down across Bristol Bay, but adding more moisture into the north and western parts of the Gulf slowly and surely. A new low pressure system there as we head into Thursday at 1,014 millibars. We'll see this play out as we head into Friday and Saturday. That's a look at your Alaska weather. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.